Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for WandaVision. In this video I will review the entire series of WandaVision as a whole. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for WandaVision up to the very end. To the very last episode, which was in fact titled the series finale. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, WandaVision. Now, it's kind of funny because this was meant to be the fourth release in Phase 4 of the MCU. It was supposed to be Black Widow was the first, and then the Eternals would be the second, and then Falcon and Winter Soldier would be the third, and this would be the fourth. But because of COVID, things got pushed back and delayed, and it just so turns out that this ends up being the first thing to air. And I actually think that really affected the reception of this show. I think it probably got a lot more attention because of this. Because people have been so starved for any like Marvel stuff in the MCU. I mean, they intentionally took a break between Phase 3 and 4, but that break ended up being a lot longer than what they intended because of COVID. So, so I think a lot of people were starved for anything Marvel, and so when this came on, it's just like, yes, Marvel's finally back, and so everyone's like really paying close attention. What does this mean for Phase 4 to come? What's the theories? How does this affect the MCU? Blah, 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 and everyone's just shining a light on it. Now, they kind of announced this one originally as this sort of I want to say sort of I want to use the word artistic, but maybe it's like it's a kind of a departure. It's experimental, maybe is a better word for it. It's not your typical MCU property, and they did make it sure. So that's probably why they originally didn't want it to open Phase 4, and they wanted something a bit more traditional MCU like Black Widow to do so. So it's actually, and I think that may somewhat be responsible for all of the negative. There has been some negative responses. A lot of people feel disappointed by this show. I think that possibly could be why, because it's the first property back that a lot of people were putting unfair expectations on it when it was meant to be sort of not your typical MCU property. And this is and to be honest, this is the one I personally was looking forward to most. I wasn't really looking forward that much to Black Widow or the Eternals or Falcon and Winter Soldier, but this. So I was kind of happy when I heard this that would be the first one released, because when I first heard the concept that it would be strange, not typical MCU, I was all for it, and how it used like the theme of sitcoms in a strange way to pay tribute to them, but yet tell a strange story with like magic and where everything isn't as it appears, which is really up my alley. But anyway, first thing I want to talk about when it comes to this show is how it was released. Now, I actually think this is an important thing to talk about, and I think it did in fact affect the reception of the show greatly, as a matter of fact. The fact that this was released one episode at a time. Now, first 2 episodes were released at once, but after that it was 1 episode every week, and each episode is roughly half hour. I think the exception being the final 2 episodes, which were more like 45 minutes. But the first 6 were mostly 30-minute or so episodes. And here's the thing. I actually think that me personally, that had this been dropped all at once and people would just binge it, I think I would have appreciated the show a lot more, and I think a lot of other people would as well. I personally think this would have been a better received show if they had dropped it all at once. Now, it may sound odd coming from me because in the past I've always sort of promoted releasing episodes weekly, and I've actually strayed away from the binge method. In fact, I think it's a bad idea, generally speaking, because it's when you release it weekly, the hype for the show lasts longer. So just from a strictly business perspective, you get more people talking about it, more people spending money on merchandise or hype around the show, more people watching it if you release it weekly. Whereas if you drop it all at once, people will watch it in, at different times, so there's not as much conversation going, so there's not as much buzz around it. There's a few exceptions to this rule, like Stranger Things or whatever, at least the first couple seasons. But generally speaking, the buzz around it dies out a lot quicker when you drop it all at once. And I talked about this a lot in my coverage of The Expanse, because that was dropped all at once for season 4, where it was weekly before that, and I really hated that because I didn't have that same sort of discussion, the same theorizing, the same sort of just communal experience. Now, so why am I contradicting myself when it comes to this show? How come I'm saying, well, this would have been better as a binge? And I think I could hear the response being, no, Mark, I think you're wrong. I think it's better that they released it 1 week at a time, because that allowed for all the theorizing and the communal experience and people talking, hyping up the show and talking about, what's coming next. And honestly, I think that's exactly why they shouldn't have released it weekly, and they should have binged it, because I actually think that the theorizing and all the speculation damaged my experience with the show, and I think it damaged a lot of other people's experience of the show, particularly judging by some of the responses that I heard, because they all had to do with, well, my theories didn't come true. Oh, well, this is disappointing, and my theories were more interesting to it. And so I think they actually probably would have been better off to just drop it all at once, and avoid the theorizing, because I actually think the theorizing was a bad thing. Now, so me personally, how I say I think I would have enjoyed this show better had it been dropped all at once instead of weekly, is because before I watched the show, I had positively no idea whatsoever who the hell Agatha Harkness was. Never heard the name, never read the comics, had no freaking idea. But after the second or maybe third episode, I go online and watch videos and stuff, and they tell me, oh, this is that Agnes character? Oh, she's definitely Agatha Harkness. And they tell me exactly who Agatha Harkness is, and go into her background and say blah, blah, blah. So now it's in my head when I'm watching a show. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's definitely Agatha Harkness. And when they get to the reveal, I'm like, yeah, I knew it was Agatha all along, because these YouTube videos told me weeks ago. No big surprise. And also, it really got my expectations up too high on theories and stuff from the comics, which I think I'll talk about more later on. But yeah, so and so part of the reason why I was kind of, that was it, that we didn't get Mephisto or we didn't get a Doctor Strange appearance, because people misconstrued some of the actors' interviews to make them think there's a huge cameo coming in. And all that would have been avoided if they just dropped it all at once. Because I would have watched it on the first day, and then after I watched it, I would learn about Agatha Harkness, but it would be after I've already seen it. So when I first watch it, I would be like, holy shit, this is a villain named Agatha Harkness, oh my god. And there was subtle clues, the fact that when they showed Sword and the FBI having all the names of everyone in the town, they matched the characters from the WandaVision show to the license plates, and yet Agnes didn't have a driver's license. I didn't notice that until someone on the YouTube channel, hey, guess what? Watch this thing carefully. I'm like, oh my god, you're right. So, and I think stuff like that is probably better if you earn it rather than just having a lot of YouTube channels saying, oh, this is 10 things you didn't know about. And of course they're going to do it because it's a lot of buzz around the show, and the clickbaity is what gets them all the money and whatnot. So, I mean, you could say, well, Mark, you don't have to watch it, but come on now. Of course I'm going to watch it. I'm weak-willed, and I know a lot of people are, but if they dropped it all at once, I wouldn't have that issue. That temptation would not be there. But that's just me. And I don't think it's just me, though. I was going to say that's just me, but I think, again, judging by all the negative responses, I think all these other people would have enjoyed it better had it been binged, had they not been subject to these theories and gotten their expectations up way too high. Now, the other aspect of it is that each episode was 30 minutes long. And I think, personally, like, having to wait every week for a dramatic serialized show like this, where you only get very snippets. It's like someone shows you a movie, and they show you 10 minutes, and they turn it off, and it's like, okay, you gotta wait a week to see the next 10 minutes, and so you see another 10 minutes, and then they turn it off. I know it's not like a perfect analogy because it's 30 minutes, but that's pretty much how it feels. And plus, if you turn it off 10 minutes, you'd be in the middle of a scene, whereas the episodes are meant to sort of have their own sort of endings and beginnings, and they're more crafted that way. But still, I feel like this show, a lot more than many others, was basically just telling one story. So it is almost like, it's like if you had ended, not at 10 minutes perfect, but at the end of a scene or whatever. Because it does seem each episode feeds into the next, feeds into the next, feeds into the next. So I personally found it really frustrating having I think the episodes either should have been an hour long, or they should have showed 2 episodes a week. At the least, if they're not going to drop it all at once, which actually I think would have been the best option. Just drop it all at once. Because I know why they did the 30-minute episode, because it was an homage to sitcoms, and sitcoms are around 30 minutes. But it's not a sitcom. It's an homage to sitcoms, but it actually tells a very dramatic story, and you need at least an hour for a dramatic serialized story like that. A half an hour a week is nothing. It's not enough. It's because I start to forget like what happens like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I did before I made this review. So before I made this review, I did in fact go back and watch the whole entire show in one day to get that binge experience, and I think I enjoyed it more because more things were more fresh in my mind. Of course, I had all these YouTube videos reminding me, oh, remember this episode? But it's better to sort of get that experience. Like, one thing I noticed on the rewatch, well, of course this is a rewatch because it is... Another thing I really like about the show is that you get a different experience on the rewatch, that you pick up more things. Like I noticed in the episode 2, when they're doing the magic show, you could actually see, if you look closely, you could see Agnes in the audience sort of moving her hands around doing magic, which I think was a nice little Easter egg that no one really caught on to. But anyway, let me talk about, since I'm on the topic of sitcoms, let me talk about me personally, my experience with sitcoms, because I've heard a lot of other people say, oh, I used to watch these sitcoms all the time, so I really appreciate it. I get sort of call back to it and whatnot. And then I have other people who are like, I've never seen any of these shows, so I didn't really care about this homage to the sitcoms. And I'm kind of more on that length, that I didn't really have any attachment to these sitcoms. Particularly, I never liked the classic older 50s, 60s sitcoms. I remember these were actually a lot more popular when I was a kid in the 80s. And a lot of kids, in fact, used to watch them a lot. In fact, I had friends at school who would love these older 50s shows, and they would watch them on Nickelodeon all the time and talk about them. And I tried getting into it. I just couldn't. I just don't like them. at all. I never liked them. And so I had zero attachment to them. In fact, I kind of found it annoying that, and particularly those first two episodes were the most like just like a plain sitcom, with less of the actual sort of Wanda story involved. And it followed the same format of one of those shows like I Love Lucy or Dick Van Dyke Show or what have you, or Bewitched. And I just I don't care for that style at all. I have no attachment to it whatsoever. In fact, and then we get to the later years, like the Brady Bunch I actually used to watch a lot when I was a little kid. That's different. But I don't remember it very well because I was a little kid. I haven't watched it all since I've been an adult. And it doesn't seem to me like that episode was particularly, I mean, it was, the setting was kind of Brady Bunch's, but it wasn't really Brady Bunch like the way that the first two episodes were really much like I Love Lucy or whatnot. And then Family Ties is another show I watched as a kid, but I don't remember anything about it. And I think they took their thing from, I mean, I used to watch 80s like family sitcoms a lot though, so that felt a bit more familiar to me. But again, it wasn't since I was a kid. Now they actually skipped the 90s, which annoys me. And they went straight to the early 2000s with Malcolm in the Middle, because I looked it up. Malcolm in the Middle's first season aired in the year 2000, so they skipped the 90s. And they basically, like, most of the other previous episodes were like amalgamations of a lot of sitcoms from that era, although focused more on one or two. Like the 70s one definitely focused more on the Brady Bunch, but you could say it's somewhat like the Partridge Family or some other ones from the 70s. And same with the 80s ones, it was mostly Family Ties, but you have Sense of Growing Pains and some other 80s sitcoms not coming to me at the moment. But this 2000s one was straight up Malcolm in the Middle. It was like nothing else. It was just Malcolm in the Middle. And I never watched that show. I never watched a single episode of that show. I maybe saw snippets of it. It's like, yeah, this is dumb. I mean, because honestly, the early 2000s when I was getting out of sitcoms. I wasn't really into them at the moment, at that point in time. And actually never really got back into them, to be honest. Which also brings me to The Office and Modern Family. Also never watched those shows, and I know, oh my god, it's a criminal offense I had never seen The Office, because so many people love it and think it's the greatest thing ever. Now, actually, just recently, like just a few months ago, I watched a couple of episodes on Netflix, or whatever the hell it's on, Amazon, whatever it's on now. I watched a couple of episodes of it, and I was like, yeah, I don't see what's so great about it. It didn't really entice me to watch more episodes. Unlike like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, I've actually watched a whole bunch of that, even though that show kind of disgusts me. But that's another topic altogether. At least it enticed me to watch more. Whereas The Office, I was kind of like, whatever. And I never watched Modern Family. I think I watched a couple minutes of it, like a couple of scenes. I'm like, this looks stupid, and gave up on it. So I had no attachment to that whatsoever. So basically, all the sitcom styles they covered, I have zero attachment to. I still wish that, because I did watch sitcoms a lot, but they just didn't really cover the kinds that I watched. Like, I wish they really did like a Seinfeld-esque. It pissed me off that they skipped the 90s. They could have done. I know The Simpsons is more animated show, but they kind of could have worked in some reference from that. And you could say, and Seinfeld was my bread and butter, and you could say, well, the reason why they didn't do that, because this is about a suburban family, where Seinfeld was about a bunch of singles in urban landscape of New York City, so it wouldn't really fit. But they could still have they could still do like a style of a sort of, I was actually expecting was a what was that show called? Married with Children. Like when they got to the 90s, I thought they were flat out going to do Married with Children, because that was a popular sort of family sitcom that sort of flipped everything else. But whatever, they could focus on other family sitcoms of the 90s, but have like some style of Seinfeld sort of switched in there. Like they could have that or whatever, have Wanda come in and be like, "What's the deal with Sword?" I would have thought that was funny. But anyway, they skipped the 90s and they went straight to a show, Malcolm in the Middle, just that one show that I never watched in my life. So that kind of irritated me, honestly. But anyway, and come to think about it, most of my favorite sitcoms were sort of more like business or adult based than they were family sitcoms, because I never got into them except for The Simpsons. Except for when I was a little kid, of course, I used to watch Cosby Show and Growing Pains and all that kind of nonsense, but I don't really remember any of that. But they did cover some of that stuff in the 80s episode, as I said. But yeah, so I don't know, and it's also like, I think it requires a level of disbelief to say that Wanda, by the premise of the show, basically, that Wanda created this world where they're acting out sitcoms and they're actually airing it, which I don't understand. Like, why are they sending out like a stream? Like, who they expect to watch it? Why does Wanda want people to watch her? And then she cuts off the stream, though, in the Office episode. So why are they still doing that, documentary style type thing if no one's actually watching it? Like, I don't know. Like, I think the more you think about this sitcom premise, it doesn't really make any sense, and you have to really stretch your disbelief to buy that Wanda. I mean, they try to sell, I know, with her saying, "Oh, she used to watch sitcoms as a kid," but seriously, how they would do like the decade jumping, and each episode fit a specific decade. I mean, that's obviously, to me, it takes me out of the world, and it's a production thing. It's a stylized way that they wanted to present the TV show, and it doesn't really, to me, work in universe as well. That's just me. I know a lot of people are probably going to disagree. "Oh, you're totally wrong, Mark." But I'm sorry. That's just that is just how I felt about it. Now, I mentioned before that there have been a lot of negative response. I wouldn't say like totally negative, like the show sucks, I hate it. More of lukewarm, particularly towards the ending, when a lot of people are like, "Well, that's it." No, I'm disappointed. And I talked before about a lot of that was due to the fan theories and speculation and theorizing that people were letting their imaginations, expectations run away with them. And of course, when it turned out to be something more straightforward, they're like, "Really?" And so I fell into a couple of those traps, but ultimately, when I think about it, it's like, well, that's my own fault for expecting it. So I don't actually agree with these negative responses. In fact, I heard some people say that the Monica Rambeau character was completely pointless, which I absolutely, utterly, totally, 100% disagree with. For me, I was kind of like, it was the first couple episodes I was a bit iffy about the show, because as I said, they were flat out sitcoms. I was like, yeah, this is it. But as soon as I got into the episode 4 when they revealed the sword, I was hooked. And it's funny because I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, the sword stuff wasn't very interesting. They only liked the Wanda stuff," which I, again, totally disagree. That if it wasn't for the sword stuff, I probably wouldn't like the show as much. I think it really added a flavor. And, of course, I think the best episodes were the ones that focused on both the sword stuff and the Wanda stuff. The ones that were straight-up sitcom episodes, they didn't work for me, really. And, again, I'm getting back to, they should have dropped it all at once. So, like, if I binged it, I would have been like, if I could just go straight to the next episode, that's fine. And it's like, okay, this is a sitcom, but I'll get to the next one. This is a sitcom, and I get to the next one. We're starting to reveal more things. And I get to the final episode where they reveal the whole, what it's all about. And I'm like, oh, so it's worthwhile. But watching it week to week, I'm like, it really puts more of a damper on it. You have to wait 2 weeks to find out. I don't know. I already talked about that, but that's just me. Point is, I don't really disagree. I don't really agree. I don't agree with these negative theories. I think a lot of people are too down on this show, which I actually think was amazing and really worked extremely well. That's just me. So let me talk about some of these specific fan theories that people had and were disappointed about. First of all, let's get into the Evan Peters Quicksilver. Because when this episode first aired, and the first one at the end, they had this big reveal that it's Evan Peters from Quicksilver. So when I saw that, like, I knew immediately, I recognized Evan Peters, don't worry. Like, I knew it was the Fox version of Quicksilver that appeared in the X-Men films. And when I first saw that, for the first time, I was like, huh, they got the Fox guy to play him. Oh, that's interesting. And then I went on YouTube, and I was watching people, like, their minds were literally exploding, and they were like, oh my god, it's a multiverse, and they were going, like, crazy, and they're, like, losing all their shit, and they're like, this is the best episode ever, and I was like, that episode was okay, and that reveal was, fine, I guess. We'll see what they do with it. But they're losing their shit and going crazy with all these theories. Oh, is it made about the multiverse? They're going to bring in Reed Richards. All the X-Men are going to go show. La, 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 la. And I'm just like, I didn't even think about any of that when I first saw it. I was like, they got the same actor who played Quicksilver. And honestly, I think all of their bluster and excitement did kind of drive my expectations too high that it would be tied in to a multiverse somehow. I've heard other people say, well, that's the show's fault. That, of course, fans are going to theorize it's going to be a multiverse, and of course they're going to think they can bring in other X-Men things. I didn't. Not until all these other people online started doing it. And so, I don't know, but I do kind of think, why did they cast Evan Peters to play Quicksilver, especially with the reveal at the end that was just some guy named Boner, which I actually did think was a funny joke, and a lot of people were really pissed about that. Oh, really? So you're going to bring in this huge thing, get up our expectations so high just for a Boner joke? I think that was actually funny. And maybe I was a little bit disappointed just because I let these YouTube personalities carry me away with it, but then it sort of brought me back down to reality, grounded where I began before I let them get me carried away. That, they just thought it would be a cool Easter egg to have the same actor who played Quicksilver in a different franchise play him there. That's all it is. Now, I think there is a possibility, though, because of the fan outcry, that Marvel might change direction, actually start to make it kind of retcon this to be like, oh, actually it wasn't just the Boner guy, it was actually the Quicksilver from a different universe. That's possible. I think Marvel's done that before, so I wouldn't put it past them, but I personally think they shouldn't. That's me. And also, like, I heard all these theories about Mephisto, who, again, I've never heard of. And not if it wasn't for this video, it's like, oh my god, are the kids going to be Mephisto? Is the rabbit Mephisto? Maybe that fly on the wall is Mephisto. Maybe Quicksilver is Mephisto. Maybe I'm Mephisto. Are you Mephisto? And I'm just like, calm down. Like, I don't even know who the fuck... I still don't really know who Mephisto is. Some villain from the comic book, so I didn't care. Like, and again, I think they let they sort of held me, got me carried away a little bit, thinking that they might appear, but when he didn't, I was like, it didn't bother me at all. One thing that did bother me, though, which I do think had nothing to do with all the speculation online, that even if I was just binging it, it still would have got my expectations high, even now if I was completely blocked off from any external theorizing or anything else, was the whole thing about the aerospace engineer. Well, I think it's worse because of the weekly format. Because Monica mentioned, I had this aerospace engineer friend. He's going to meet us, and they're making such a big deal out of it. And that immediately made me think it was going to be a known character. Like, even before the episode was over, so it didn't have anything to do with anything I read or watched online. Absolutely nothing. That in the show itself made me think, well, why would they build, and especially the fact that they took like 3 weeks to reveal it, and they kept dropping hints every week. I'm like, oh, they keep hinting at this, they keep hammering this home. There's definitely going to be a huge reveal. And I didn't know who to think until I went onto YouTube, and then they threw out theories like War Machine or fucking Reed Richards and other theories like that. But so I wasn't thinking those specifically until I watched YouTube videos. But even without the YouTube videos, I even though I didn't have any specific names in mind, I knew I saw, well, this has to be a known character. It has to be a huge cameo. Otherwise, why are they going to make such a big deal out of it for 3 weeks? But no, it's just some random person that they're introducing for the first time. Although, yeah, again, the producers are kind of hinting at, oh, maybe there is a big aerospace engineer. Well, if there is, I don't give a fuck because I have to wait years for it to find out. No, if it's going to be a big cameo, you have to do it in the show itself. It's total, complete nonsense bullshit. That's being an asshole, basically. If you're like, oh, it's a big thing, but you have to wait 3 years to find out. Fuck you. No. It was bad enough you made us wait 3 weeks just to find out it's some random person. So that actually did piss me off. And I think it had absolutely nothing to do with any online speculation. It's just in the show itself, it seemed to make the perfect sense, and then they just turned out to be nothing. Anyway, so let me get into my reaction to the episodes itself. So, as I said, the first 3 episodes, I didn't really care for that much. I mean, they were okay. I didn't think they sucked or anything. Like, it was still interesting. But again, they followed too much, particularly those first 2. They followed too much a very stereotypical. It was like watching a sitcom, basically. But then you had a few sort of side notes during it. And again, it is kind of interesting to go back and watch them after you've seen the show, because you had what seemed like weird shit, such as like the radio where Jimmy Woo is saying, Wanda, are you being, and that was like really actually good misdirect. I really like that one, where saying, Wanda, is someone doing this to you? Because it makes you think that someone is doing this to her, but in fact they have no idea, and that she's the one who's actually creating it. And then the stuff with the beekeeper, where that didn't seem to make any sense. And I like how when Vision started to like figure out that something was wrong, and being like, so Wanda, what's going on? Tell me what's wrong. And then all of a sudden it cuts and it rewinds, and Wanda is sort of, it's really hinting that Wanda is like, doesn't like any sort of outside influence and stuff like that. And it's also interesting, the scene where the dude was choking, and the wife kept saying, stop it. Now at first I was like, why is she yelling at him because he's choking? It's not his fault. But then it's played really creepily for a long time, and on the rewatch it's kind of obvious that some of her sort of true self is coming through, where she's saying this to Wanda, like, stop doing this to us. Stop mind controlling us. Just stop it. But, it can't break through entirely, so she still has to remain in character, but I think that's part of her true self coming out because she's so panicked, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, after the first 2 episodes, I was lukewarm on the show, but it's episode 4 that completely sold me. It's after seeing episode 4, I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. I was in it 100%, particularly at the beginning that showed Monica re-blipping, I guess, or unsnapping, or whatever you call it, reappearing after the snap, because you got the different version of the snap. Because part we really saw of how this affected like normal people was in the Spider-Man Far From Home, where they played it more as for comedy. Where here it was played more of like it portrayed the chaos and that would be involved in this, and how dramatic it would be, and how some blip would return after a loved one had died a few years ago, when they were, from their perspective, they were just with them a couple minutes ago. So that was really powerful. I really liked that, and I really liked the sort of interactions between Jimmy Woo and Darcy, and seeing the different characters and having their perspective from what was going on with Wanda. And so I actually loved this episode, and so this made me appreciate the next couple episodes, 5 and 6, as well. As I said, 5, they start, because now that the sort of wool was pulled over the audience eyes and they were aware of what's going on, they started playing with this more in the Wanda story. So you had Vision starting to like become aware more that something was wrong, while he had his workmate, and he sort of freed him temporarily from the mind control, and he started freaking out. I was like, oh, she's controlling me. And then you had that like confrontation between Wanda and Vision, which I thought was fucking amazing, like where he started freaking out, and she's like, you've never yelled at me like this before, and he's like, I have no memory of who I was before. Like, that was absolutely amazing. And then of course the Quicksilver showed up, and then the next episode, the Malcolm in the Middle one, that also played on it more. Like, so most of the commercials I didn't really care that much for. Like, a lot of people love speculating on the commercials, but looking back on it now, some of them were somewhat interesting. Like, I noticed the one for I think it was the 60s one with the toaster. Maybe it was the 50s one of those two. They had this toaster, and it was sort of beeping. I realized now it was beeping like the same way that the bomb was shown beeping later on when Wanda was a kid, the bomb that almost killed her and her brother, and it was also by Stark Industries. So that was a nice Easter egg. But in the Malcolm in the Middle one, I think the commercial with the Yo Magic being like a snack treat or whatever, but it shows a guy like unable to open it and he dies. That could be, it could be that it's hinting that Vision and the kids are sort of dependent on her magic, and they need her magic to exist, and without it they do shrivel up and die. And it also could be hinting at the fact that Agatha wants to suck out Wanda's magic, although I think it has more to do with the fact that Vision is dependent on this magic, which I thought was very interesting. And so they get into the thing where Vision is actually, I gotta admit that it was properly misdirected when Agnes had her scene with Vision. She's like, "You're dead. You're one of the Avengers." That made me think, "Oh, the Agatha there is bullshit." So that was actually a nice misdirection. But it turns out she was. Although I still considered the possibility that she was just lying to him. But most of me thought that perhaps the theory was wrong. So that was actually well done. Now, I think the next two episodes, though, 7 and 8, were the height of the show. I think this was the show at its absolute best. The Office one, even though I don't like the Office Modern Family style, that brand, that particular style of genre, I hate it, actually. That's why I never watched the shows. That's why I couldn't watch The Office, because I hate that whole documentary style, or it reminds me too much of like a reality show, which I can't stand reality shows where they have people sit aside and be like, oh, to have their thoughts. This is the kind of humor that I just never got into. I just personally don't like that style at all. So it kind of that part of this episode I didn't like very much, but what happened in it I thought was actually pretty amazing, of the aftermath of Wanda spreading the hex even further, and how it exhausted her, and how she was kind of blocking Vision from returning, and of course the ending, the Agatha all along thing. I love that. I think that was an absolute amazing moment. Even though, again, I kind of knew it was Agatha Harkness because of all the theories online and whatnot, it still didn't stop that moment from being any less amazing. Particularly like that song, because I see that, and especially in the rewatch, I realized that Agatha was kind of playing that song. She like mind controlled Wanda and was playing that song for her. So we were seeing her perspective, and it was kind of Agatha's way of sort of saying, "Oh, well, you want to do this sitcom 50s style? Well, here's my version of it that I was fucking with your sitcom thing all along." And so that's why it's done in a particular, sitcom version or olden style. I thought that was absolutely amazing. Loved it so much. And the next episode was also like mind blowing, where it gets into the flashbacks. I think this is where you start to get the more of the emotional weight behind what Wanda's doing, and it really drives home how tragic a character Wanda is and how much trauma she's suffered in her life, and sort of helps explain. Of course, we get it kind of the beginning of the story basically in this episode, because the first episode doesn't begin at the beginning of the story. It begins sort of part way through, because we're thrown into the sitcom world and we have no idea what the deal is with it. But here it shows the actual build up to the sitcom world, and how, and also going through the different events of her life. Shows just how tortured a character she is, and it sort of makes it more relatable, more understandable anyway, that she would just freak out with her grief and just create this fictional world where she can escape in. Because sitcoms like this, and especially those happy family ones, that's probably why they skipped the 90s, because there's too many sort of downer ones, and went for something like Malcolm in the Middle, which is a bit more upbeat. Because they're those kind of sitcoms are escapism and an idealized perfect world to escape real life shittiness and how real life is shit, which is basically what she's doing. She's creating a fictional happy fantasy world where everyone can be happy, but of course underneath she's actually spreading her grief to everyone. Which is a nice little tidbit that I liked. Now, episode 9, I think people are too harsh on this episode, the finale, but I do agree it's not quite the great ending I was expecting. I think it was satisfactory. I think it was a satisfactory ending. I wouldn't call it disappointing per se, but it's not as great as I thought it would be. I thought it was just satisfactory instead of amazing, which I think this show actually deserved. And the main reason I think that is because it kind of resorted to a Marvel-esque two versions of the same character fighting each other, and like people with magic floating above the sky throwing beams of light at each other. And I understand that criticism. A lot of people had that same criticism, and I actually totally agree with that. That was a bit disappointing. It's like, really? So this is like a really thinky, really abstract, off-the-cuff, experimental type, magic-based, reality-based, very personal character story, and now it's just going to turn into a typical Marvel heroes fighting villains throwing energy beams at each other. Like the whole stuff with Agatha and Wanda flying in the air and they keep throwing the beams. Like, I was kind of falling asleep during that, to be honest. And even the Vision fighting Vision, I heard a lot of people say, "Oh, that was so amazing." I also didn't really care. And it ended, of course, I did like how they ended with that philosophical debate. And of course, once I guess you would call him Wanda's Vision brought it up, the White Vision was like, tell me more, and stopped fighting him. And of course, White Vision gone off, and now he has all the memories of the real Vision, so he could potentially one day return to being Vision. So now we have a backdoor to bring Vision back to life. And I know I've heard a lot of people who really hate that concept and they hate that idea and they think it undermines the grief that Wanda's feeling. But I have several things to say to that. First thing is, welcome to Marvel. I mean, this is what comic book does. There are always no real stakes. Characters always come back to life all the time, one form or the other. But but the other thing to that I would say is I actually don't think it undermines it. I think even if they do manage to bring a Vision back for all intents and purposes, doesn't change the fact that she had to kill him and then watch him die. And had to live with that grief for that time, even if he does come back later on. So I disagree with that personally. Anyway, let me go ahead and get into some of the characters now. Let me start with the first Hayward character. He started out like an interesting character, particularly with the first episode 4 with Monica, where he was like, oh, he took over the company now, and he recruited Monica for this mission, and blah, blah, whatever. He seemed like an ordinary, typical guy. And then the next episode, he's like, oh, you just want to support the superheroes. Wanda's the villain here. She's a terrorist. And I was like, that's a bit less realistic. And then by the time we get to the finale, he's a straight-off mustache-twirling villain. And I think they completely assassinated his character. He went from being an ordinary, believable agent-type character to an over-the-top, twirling a mustache, shooting at children character who was really cartoonish, by the way, especially how Darcy just drove him, like, enjoy jail or whatever. And I was like, this... Am I watching a cartoon now? It seems like I'm watching a cartoon now. Anyway, so yeah, overall didn't really care for that character. But anyway, we also get Jimmy Woo. Now here's the thing. I've heard so many people talk about how much they love Jimmy Woo and how amazing he is and how great. Oh, let's give him his own show. He's such a great character. Oh, he's so great. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, as far as this show goes anyway. But here's the thing, and this is maybe just my impression, maybe a lot of people disagree, or I think more likely a lot of people don't remember. He wasn't very good of a character when he was in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And in fact, I hated this character when he was in Ant-Man and the Wasp. I thought he was a really annoying character, and I thought the comic relief they tried to do with him did not work at all. And I was just like, he was comically stupid. And in a way that made me think, well, they're kind of making fun of this guy in a cruel way, and I don't like it. And I just thought it was goofy, and I hated this character. But then they brought him back here, and you could say, wow, they improved upon him, which they did. Like, he was much better. Like, I didn't mind him at all. In fact, I thought he was a great character in this show. And of course, they had the callbacks to the magic tricks from the Ant-Man, which I called right away. But here's the thing about that. It's completely inconsistent. I don't buy it. They totally 100% retcon his character. He's a totally different character than he was in Ant-Man. Because in Ant-Man, he was a moron, and he was annoying, and he was desperate for attention, and he was portrayed as pathetic, where here he's actually a very effective agent. He wasn't wasn't desperate for attention. And you could say, I know a lot of people might say, oh, he just grew as a character. It's been several years. I'm like, because we don't know if he blipped or not. Nah, I think that's bullshit. I don't buy it. I think this is a retcon on the character. I don't think this actually matches with the character they portrayed in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So I'm not opposed to seeing this character again, assuming that they portray him in the same way they portrayed him here and just forget about the Ant-Man and Wasp portrayal. But I don't think he should get his own show. I think you're getting a bit overboard with that now. Now, Darcy apparently was a character a lot of people hated and were annoyed with from Thor, but I actually didn't mind her. And in fact, I kind of was like, because she was in those first 2 Thor movies and then disappeared. So I was kind of like, they kind of just disappeared this character. So it was interesting to see her return. And she's relatively funny. Like, I found her adequately funny. I didn't think she's hilarious, but I didn't think she was annoying either. So She was fine. Monica Rambeau. Now, this is another thing I didn't mention that from watching it week to week and watching the online reception, I knew that she was Monica Rambeau before the reveal. And if I binged it, I wouldn't have known that, and I would have been more surprised. But whatever. Of course, because she was the little girl who appeared in Captain Marvel. Again, I've heard a lot of people say they thought her storyline was completely pointless and you could take her out of the show would make no difference. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. First of all, I think she gives a different perspective to the show, especially having that episode 4 where we see her perspective from the outside. I think it adds a lot to have this character in the sitcom world who, that something's maybe wrong with her in the first 2 episodes, but in the 3rd episode, they hint at it even more, and she talks about, that's what Ultron killed your brother, right? Like, that was great stuff. Like, if you take that out, you lose a lot. Now, you could say, she doesn't really affect the story that much, and her storyline's a waste of time, but I think she does, because at the end, I think she ultimately, what she says to Wanda gets her to realize, to accept the fact that she's in pain and she's suffering, to accept that she's enforcing that suffering onto others unintentionally, and so you need her character. So I think those people that say that she's unnecessary and superfluous are factually incorrect. I think she's absolutely vital to the show. Even, she doesn't, you could say, all she does is save the kids' lives. That she doesn't actually defeat any villains or whatnot, but she affects Wanda's point of view and can be a character there that relates to Wanda and sees her point of view. And I think they portrayed that beautifully by showing that scene where she unblipped and her mother was dead, and how that was kind of similar to what Monica went through, and how she could relate that she would do anything to bring her mother back as well, so she can relate to Wanda wanting to bring Vision back. Like that, you need that bond. That was essential to the show. Now, as far as her getting her powers that are, based off the comic book, it was kind of silly, but, again, this is an MCU property, so I know to expect stuff like that, so it doesn't bother me. There's one thing I wanted to talk about, though. There was a scene where she mentioned Captain Marvel. Now, again, I went online and everyone's like, ooh, burn! She hates Captain Marvel. Oh my God, look at her. She absolutely can't stand her. Why is there beef with Captain Marvel? Why does she hate her so much? And when I first watched that scene, I was just like, I didn't get that impression. And when the people were saying that, I was like, really? All I thought she said was, don't talk about Captain Marvel. So when I went back and I watched that scene again today, it's even less much of a sting on Captain Marvel than I thought initially. It's even less bad than what I thought. That she's basically... Because I thought she said something like, don't talk to me about Captain Marvel. But when Jamie Woo was like, Captain Marvel could defeat Thanos, she basically responds by saying, we're not talking about Captain Marvel right now. That's it. That's all she said. To me, that is not a huge, fuck Captain Marvel, I don't want to talk about her, fuck her, get her out of her, I hate her, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, no, we're focusing on other things right now. Personally, and this is just me, and I could be completely wrong, but personally, I think everyone's blowing that way out of proportion, and I think she said nothing of the sort, and they're creating these minds that there's this huge feud between her and Captain Marvel, and there's this huge beef and backstory that I think doesn't exist. I think personally, that they're reading way too much into nothing that's there. They're reading into something that's not there. It's nothing. Nothing was mentioned. All she said was, we're not talking about her right now. We're focusing on these other things. That's all she said. That's it. So personally, if there is a feud with her and Captain Marvel, I think it's incidental to this. I think if you just go judge the material by itself, by the show, what happens in the show, none of this stuff online, none of what the people are saying online, there is no beef between her and Captain Marvel. Objectively, none. It does not exist. Just by what's in the show. But, again, we'll see what other people say, but I totally don't think so. Anyway, Agatha and the Agnes portrayal, again, I really liked it. I think they added a lot. Although, I think they did, once she became a witch and they revealed her, well, I think in the penultimate episode it was fine, but in the final episode she was just like, and throwing magic at it. It's like, okay, she's kind of becoming cliche villain. She was a bit more interesting before. But I do like the sort of eeriness that you could tell that something was off about her, particularly in, I think it was episode 5 when she was like, she asked to pick up the kids and Vision said no. She's like, oh, should I try that again? Do you want to said that out of character to Wanda? So clue does in, even if you missed the part of her driver's license not having a driver's license that matched up, you could tell that she was aware that this was a show format, which I loved. So actually, overall, even though I think they did take her character too much over the top at the end, I really loved her, and I liked the way they handled her. Now, of course, the whole show was based on Wanda, and I think they did an amazing job, and I think this is why the show really works for me, and why I love it, is because I think they did an amazing job of portraying her grief, and how this has sort of controlled her. Particularly in the penultimate episode, I think, when they had her backstory and you saw how tortured of a person she was, and how she had her parents die in front of her, and they had to be stuck in the, in the bomb thing they think would go off for like 2 days, and then how she was subjected to these experiments, that she was used by Hydra, and then later on that she lost Pietro, her brother, her only family, and then after that she was forced to kill the one she loved, and then just to have him brought back to life and watch him die again in front of her eyes. That she was so that she was extremely traumatized, and I think that's sort of what we experience is that trauma. And of course you add into the fact that she's a magical being, that apparently the most powerful one in the world, that she's able to manifest that grief and take control of a whole town to try, as I said, to try to create this fantasy world. And I think, especially, and this is the part about the finale that I did love. I love how she was brought to the reality that what she was doing was torture to these people, that she was torturing people, and she became to realize that she couldn't live in this fantasy world at the expense of others anymore. So she agreed to take it down, which meant she would lose her children and the man that she loved. And I think that scene, it did bring a tear to my eye. I think it was effectively powerful how she was willing to give it up and say goodbye, especially when she told Vision, when he asked, who am I, and he said, you're part of this. So she's saying this part of the mindset, so that means he's an actual person that exists, but he represents all of her grief and her, I can't remember what else, she's her hope, but most of all her love, and then how watching him disappear, like that was powerful, touching stuff. I think that absolutely was one of the more emotionally powerful moments of the entire MCU, personally. I think that really, really worked. Now, I want to talk about something I've heard a lot of other people complain about, and I kind of disagree on this point, is when she comes back and Monica says, all the people are giving her the town are giving her the stink eye because they basically put them through hell for a couple of weeks and had them like their minds enslaved. And Monica says to Wanda, like, they'll never understand what you gave up for them. And a lot of people have given this line shit and saying that, she like tortured these people for 3 weeks and put them through hell, but they're supposed to feel sorry for her because she lost her imaginary friend. I think that's missing the fucking point. It's not just an imaginary friend. It was an actual representation, and because they got into the whole ship of Theseus argument between the two visions, proved that he was kind of Vision, that he was and he was not Vision, just like that White Vision was and was not Vision, but he was an actual sentient being, and so were her children. By the way, that they were actual beings who she created. Now she's using magic rather than natural means, but it was still they still exist, and so she still, and plus like and this is why I do buy that line. I do think that line works, and I disagree with everyone who trashes this line, because Monica understands, because she knows that she would do if she had the powers Wanda did, she would definitely bring her mother back, even if it was at other people's expense, because grief is a very, very powerful thing. Now, should the townspeople feel sorry for Wanda? No. I'm not saying they should. and a lot of people were saying, how come Wanda's not facing any consequences for this? Well, the answer to that is because she's one of the most magical, powerful beings, and who the fuck's going to arrest her? She should just blast them. That's the real answer. Power gets away. I'm sorry. Maybe if she wasn't, maybe I would agree that she should face some jail time or whatever for what she did, but I still completely agree with what Monica said, that and she didn't just get rid of her imaginary friend. I think that's completely misrepresenting what's presented here. She had to give up the love of her life, her one way out of the trauma to deal with all the. I mean, as I said, she had a lot of fucking trauma throughout her entire life. And what she did to these people, as horrible as it was also unintentional. Like, and you can tell that from her reaction to them when they were all coming back. And I did think that was also a powerful moment, like when the Dottie person was like, oh, I have a daughter. Can you create a storyline where she becomes friends with your kids so she can come out of the room, please? Like, that was heart-wrenching. But what that scene made clear is that Wanda had no idea that she was putting these people through such hell, because she was in denial. Like, she was denying. She's like, no, you're happy. You're peaceful. I'm giving you a peaceful place. And they're like, no, you're not peaceful. When we dream, we feel your grief. You're controlling us. And so she had no idea. And basically what she did in the first place was all instinct anyway. Like, I don't think she herself was even aware of what she'd done until like episode 3 or 4. Like, she was starting to become more aware. Like, she was just going with it herself. It was kind of as an instinctual action that was kind of subconscious. She wasn't self-conscious that she was doing this. And of course she had absolutely no idea of the pain she was causing. And when she learned about the pain, her first reaction was to get rid of it and let the people go. But of course, when she saw her family was dying, she put a pause on that, but eventually she finished that and sacrificed living beings that she loved and meant the world to her in order to stop this torture that she had no idea she was doing. So is she the villain, as some people are claiming? I would say outright, flat out, no. Now, is she a hero? Not a hero either. But I think some people are missing that sort of gray area, that she's more of a dynamic character rather than just a flat-out hero or flat-out villain. I think she's obviously closer to a hero because she was willing to do self-sacrifice to save people from the torture she calls to herself, but unknowingly so. And I think throughout the show, that's the whole point that Monica's battle with Hayward is, that she's trying to point out that, look, you're looking at her like the villain, but when you've tried to conflict her directly, you're just escalating the situation, making things worse. The only one who can really resolve the situation is Wanda, and we have to reason with her, and that's eventually exactly what she does, which again is why Monica was such an essential character to the story. So I'm not saying what she did was excusable in any way. It was definitely a horrible thing, and I wouldn't be opposed to her facing some consequences for that, but I don't think that makes her the villain, and I totally disagree with other people's perspective on that. But again, That's just me. So now let me get into some of these like ending scenes, post-credit scenes, whatever, and that has implications for MCU going forward. So let's start with the Monica and the Skrulls thing. Now it's funny because when the Skrull came up to Monica, it's like, oh, we have a friend of your mother who wants to meet you up, and then points up to space. I immediately thought it was Captain Marvel, but when I went and watched all these reviews, they all said Nick Fury. I was like, Nick Fury? That actually surprised me. I had no idea. But when I went back and watched the scene, the Skrull clearly said he was a friend of your old friend of your mother. So clearly it is Nick Fury. And again, a lot of people just kind of Captain Marvel because the whole don't talk to me about Captain Marvel. But again, as I already talked about, I think that's nonsense. But regardless, it's clearly Nick Fury, which I didn't realize at the time. I just thought the wrong thing. Because I thought that a friend of your mother is clearly Captain Marvel because they were the ones that were friends. I mean, did she even know Nick Fury that much? I don't know. Maybe after the events of Captain Marvel, they became friends. I don't know. It seems like they were more acquaintances during the events of Captain Marvel. But regardless, fine, whatever. It's Nick Fury. And of course, I think it's Captain Marvel 2, though. So she is going to have some interactions with Captain Marvel. So maybe I'll find out if I'm wrong about her hating her or not. I don't know. I still think I'm not, but we'll see. So yeah, because I think that's when they're gonna do the storyline with Nick Fury and the Skrulls, as we saw in the end credit scenes of Spider-Man: Far From Home. So yeah, that's definitely the case. Now, the Wanda scene was a bit more interesting. That she's doing kind of it's Doctor Strange-esque, like astral projection. Plus, she's doing all the arm. It kind of reminded me of the Enchantress from Suicide Squad with the way her arms were moving around like that, which is not a good thing. But it does raise an interesting question because earlier Agatha mentioned that, oh, you're the Scarlet Witch, which I forgot to talk about that review. That was a bit cheesy. But how that the Scarlet Witch is destined or prophesized or whatever to end the world, basically, to destroy the world. So, and then we see her, like, doing, and they even said she's even more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme. Who is that Doctor Strange right now? Because I know it was Tilda Swinton, but then she died, and so did it become Doctor Strange after her? I don't know, but they're saying that she's even more powerful than Doctor Strange, basically. So here's my question, and they did say that this would tie into the next Doctor Strange movie, and that she is confirmed to be in that movie. Is she going to be the villain? Is she going to be the one? Is it going to be about Doctor Strange trying to prevent her from ending the world? That would be interesting. I think that is, in fact, a possibility. Of course, we heard the kids crying out to her, which means the kids could come back in some form, which I was actually kind of expecting the kids to come back because, and again, this is because of the YouTube videos, the one that I watched because I had no idea from the comics. But apparently in the comics they are regular characters, and they actually exist. And I think I heard something about she has to make a deal with Mephisto or whatever, and they're part of Demon or what. I don't know. Someone will correct me in the comments. But I know it had something to do with Mephisto, so that's why a lot of people were theorizing he would appear. But that might happen somewhere down the line. But yeah, I think it does leave us open for, and I'm really curious to see this Doctor Strange in the multiverse. Now, speaking of the multiverse, I talked about some of the commercials. The one I forgot to talk about was the Nexus one, about the antidepressant one in the Office type episode, because that was a really interesting commercial because it's the next. Apparently, I heard again the other stuff I read online or whatever, that Wanda in the comics is known as a Nexus being who somehow has the key to all the multiverse or whatever. Who I can't remember exact terms, but it has something to do with being a special figure in terms of the multiverse, and the thing was called Nexus like medicine, and the actual ad itself was like, oh, this might actually cause depression, or let you choose your reality and live in the reality that you want to, because you're not the center of the universe, or maybe you are. So that does make me think that that's perhaps has indications for the next Doctor Strange movie, that she's going to be a Nexus being who will have an important role to play in the multiverse thingy. Anyway, I'm really interested in saying I love Doctor Strange to begin with. Like the first movie was still one of my favorites of the MCU, so I'm really pumped for this sequel. And as I said, I like the magic stuff even more. I'm less interested in this Falcon Winter Soldier thing that's like a buddy cop movie, and the fact of bringing back Zemo really... it really has me worried a lot, to be honest, because he's clearly the worst villain of the MCU, but whatever. Anyway, my rating for WandaVision, out of 10, I'm going to give this a 9 excellent. I thought it was an excellent show. As I said, the first 3 episodes, it took a while to get going. I actually am kind of counting it against it, the fact that it was released weekly and not binge. I think it does affect it. Sorry. And I think that the last episode, some great things about it, like I said, the emotional, powerful scene where she had to sacrifice her family was really worked, but the throwing magical beams at each other in the sky that did not work. So the finale wasn't quite as great as it could have been, but overall, it was. I love the show. I think it did a great job of exploring grief. As I said, the sitcom format was maybe a bit contrived, and I don't quite buy it in the universe, but it was still interesting. It was still, I mean, the acting I didn't mention yet was absolutely amazing. Like, she proved that she could absolutely has the acting chops, the way she was able to do all the different various sitcom characters perfectly episode after episode. And Paul Bettany also was amazing. Like, there was just top-notch acting. So anyway, that is it for my review of WandaVision. Now, if you haven't checked it out already, I'm doing a live discussion with Darren from D's Reviews, which will air the same day that this is being released, or in the evening. So you can go over to his channel to check that out. Join us live or in the archives if you're watching this afterwards. But yeah, I'm going to talk more about WandaVision with some people, so it should be some interesting things. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel as I review many more shows, do videos and whatnot on many other shows like Star Trek, The Expanse, Breaking Bad, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.